I'm Graham Roberts from Hampshire Wildlife Trust, and I've been working on otter recovery in southern Britain for the last 20 odd years or so. And this has taken account of looking for otters here in Hampshire, Sussex, Kent and the Isle of Wight. Because otters are so rare in southern Britain, what's been important with this job is to actually find out, one, how many otters we've got, where they are, and then what are the sort of measures that we can try and do to try and get them back here, living sustainably in the south of Britain. Otters particularly live in areas associated with water, so rivers, wetlands, marshes, and sometimes along the coast. But they're very, very elusive animals, and they're very difficult to see. So what we have to do, a lot of my early work with otters was looking for the signs that the otters left behind. That's their droppings. That as scientists, we call them spraints, but they're basically their droppings, and each otter produces many of those each evening, perhaps between 30 and 40 in different places within their very large territories. And part of the job is actually going out and finding these sites, recording them, and then actually doing something with the droppings to give us more information about the otter itself. One of the things with otters, because they're so rare, and they live in very quiet places, they're often on areas of rivers, particularly of private land. And so many of us as public, we don't actually see them. And so what we have to do is build up good relationships with landowners so that they'll let us go onto their land, sometimes during the day, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night. And that way we can try and begin to build a picture of the best areas where otters are living, and also if we can actually begin to look at how many numbers we've actually got here in southern Britain. Otters declined right across Britain just after the war, so in the early 50s and 60s, and that coincided with the introduction of chemicals often used in agriculture as either pesticides or insecticides, and these unfortunately got washed down from the fields into the river systems, and then it would get taken up by the food chain. And unfortunately, the otters are at the top of a very small food chain, and they would concentrate those toxins from those chemicals. And if it didn't kill them necessarily, it rendered them infertile. So what we found is that otter numbers crashed almost everywhere in the United Kingdom between that period of time. This project has been a long-running project in partnership with originally the National Rivers Authority, and now it's the Environment Agency. And what we've been able to do is actually map where the otters are right across southern Britain. We've actually looked at the areas which we want to protect. And in some areas, we've actually provided things like artificial homes for otters. Where the rivers haven't got very much habitat, we've actually provided underground homes for them. Those are called holts, but we can make them up with artificial materials. And these provide a good stepping stone till we get the habitats restored on the rivers. Part of the job also has been important is to influence landowners on how they manage land next to their rivers. So what we're trying to do is protect a sort of buffer strip, a zone, to make sure we can protect the integrity of the river. What's very important with rivers is to keep them clean. And one of the big impacts of water quality is what happens next to the river. So if there is intensive agricultural, you will get runoff, sometimes from chemicals, sometimes from the soil itself. And that reduces the amount of available food in the river. And that's very important. Otters eat about a kilo, about 2 pounds of fish per day. And they'll try and cover about 20 miles of river. So 40 kilometres of river, one otter's required. So it's a big requirement for one animal to survive happily. So each part of the jigsaw we've been trying to restore over the years. And we are beginning to see signs of success, which is really good news for the otters. When we started in Hampshire, we think we were down to our last couple of animals. And then in 1994, we had permission to introduce 3 animals. And that's all we've ever reintroduced in Hampshire. We brought a dog otter that's known as the male otter, and 2 females, they're known as bitch otters. We put those into a secret location on one of the rivers, and from that nucleus of population, the population has begun to expand in Hampshire. And what we've seen has happened, particularly in the last 10 years, is otters have come from Dorset quite naturally. They've crossed through the New Forest into the Hampshire rivers. They've met up with our very small residual population, and now they're beginning to expand naturally. And at the moment, we've got them visiting most of the rivers of Hampshire. Occasionally, they even get to the Isle of Wight. And the next big step, we hope, in the next 10 to 20 years, is that they will naturally recolonise Sussex, which is the county to the east of us. Otters are a really, really important flagship species. And by that, I mean, if you've got otters living on a river, it means usually everything else is pretty good too. It means you've got good clean water, you've got good fish stock numbers. It means that you've got some quiet areas, which is not just important for otters, it's important for all wildlife. And by doing a project of this length of time, we've had an opportunity to study of the areas that are effective and are working very well for otters, and the areas that we feel we need to still do a lot more work at. And this is going to be ongoing. On top of that, we've got huge pressures being put on our wetlands. As we build more homes and we've got more industry, we use more water, and that reduces the amount of available water in the river itself. And by doing that, we put all life at threats, but particularly things like otters do need good large areas of water and plenty of available food. Otters are incredibly difficult to see, so recently we've made a short film called Source to Sea, An Otter's Journey, which talks about all the sort of issues that are affecting otters, and it gives you some very nice pictures of them. And some places were taken in the wild, but sometimes in wildlife parks, and that's sometimes the only places that people ever get to see them. And these will be available for anybody to buy at any stage in the future. In early days, in terms of otters, we had some sort of, even 100 years ago, just natural history societies that used to record all sorts of animals that were around. But it really was the most information we got about the distribution of otters was from the people that used to hunt them with hounds. And I found when I first started my work with otters, I actually engaged with lots of hunts to find out information, historical information about how many otters there were, the rivers they were using, and often the numbers that they used to get every year. And it gave us a pretty good indication of the areas that were good and the areas that weren't. Otters were protected from 1978 in England and in 1981 in Scotland. And since then, they've been a fully protected species. And so our methods of looking for them now are very different. We actually go out and survey for them. And I usually do it either myself or with trained people. And we have a huge network of volunteers that periodically go to sites, and we actually do surveillance work looking for otter signs, which are very distinctive. And once you know what they are, it's easy for us to find them. A technique that we've developed very much for part of this project was going out and collecting otter spraint, so that's their droppings, very, very early in the morning. Now that's important because when you're analysing droppings, we can get lots of information from them. So each dropping is going to be a little bit of an encyclopedia about that otter. It will tell us if it's male or female. It may tell us how old it is. It may tell if it's related to another otter. And we do this by looking for its DNA. And every single animal, like human beings, have independent ways of identifying ourselves. And for otters, because we can't legally catch them, and they're very, very hard to see anyway, and what we have to do is find another method. And by looking at their droppings, through very clever science, we can actually analyse those droppings. And within those droppings, there are cells that come out from the gut lining. And we can actually look at those cells, and it'll give us a lot of the information we're looking for without any impact on disturbing the animal at all. So that's really important. It's very technical. It's not easy. We haven't got all the answers yet, but it's just one tool in the box to make science make us understand a little bit more about this very elusive animal. One of the big challenges for the future will be, now that the otter is beginning to recover, is most people love them, but unfortunately we are beginning to get conflicts or perceived conflicts with fisheries. And this is because otters eat fish, and in many of our Hampshire rivers we've got many rivers that are very heavily stocked with fish for fishing. And obviously this could cause us concerns. So what we're trying to do is work with the fishing community, with fishing clubs, with fish farmers, and anybody who's got interests to try and help them understand that we should live with an animal that's been here for thousands of years in Britain, and there is a place for them. And if we try and get things balanced and if our environments are good, otters will be here for the next generation as well. There's 13 species of otter in the world, but there's only really one particular subspecies that lives here in the United Kingdom, and that's Lutra lutra it's called. But it has a big distribution range here from England right the way over as far as Japan in the east, and it goes right into most of Russia, and it extends down into the Mediterranean, into the north of Tunisia and the northern coast of Morocco. So it has a very large range. But some of the best populations left of this otter is here in Britain. And the conservation story here is a model one that many other countries in Europe are looking at, how we've brought a species back from the brink, and hopefully we're doing the right things and it's going to be here for future generations. People often ask me, why are otters important? Well, what we do know is that otters are very popular. Because they're difficult to see, people are interested in them. They also are a very attractive mammal. And so when something's rare and it's attractive, people want to know more about it. And when I first started studying otters, it was not difficult to get people interested. And the big success of having this project has been that we've been welcomed by most landowners and people who want to get involved in trying to save this very lovely animal. It's perceived as an attractive wild animal that people don't see. If we saw it every day, there wouldn't be the same sort of level of interest, I'm sure. But because it's so elusive, it's a little bit of sense of mystery about it. And then when people do see them, they're always enchanted to see them. We've been extremely lucky with this project, that right at the beginning, the National Rivers Authority and other partners decided to support us because, again, it's a high-profile animal that attracts a lot of media attention and publicity. And so originally the National Rivers Authority and more latterly the Environment Agency have worked on a joint project. We are the national partners for otter recovery in Britain, and we've worked together throughout the country as partners in helping that happen. We get lots of telephone calls from people saying, I think I saw an otter, and 90% of the time it turns out to be another animal which is called the mink. And there's a real good rule of thumb so that you don't get confused. An otter is big. You know, they can be over a metre in length from nose to tail, and a big male otter can be almost 1.5 metres. So it's a big animal, and it weighs anything up to 10 or 12 kilos, so about 25 to 30 pounds. The animal it gets confused with is the mink, which is an introduced animal brought here for the fur farm industry. They're only about 2 feet in length, so under 0.5 metre in size. They only weigh about 1 kilo, so about 2 pounds in weight. And if you see them swimming, an otter is very low in the water, whereas a mink, 2/3 of its body sits on the surface because they've got very, very dense fur. And so if you see something swimming on the surface, big black blob, it's likely to be a mink. If it's way below the water and you just see the head and it's creating a bit of a V or a bow wave, then you may be very lucky to be seeing an otter.